Hello and welcome to Builders. Today's guest is Deepak Yadav, engineering leader in data analytics and AI machine learning at Amazon. Deepak has spent over 19 years building and leading large-scale data engineering, analytics, and machine learning teams. And today he works in a part of the world where AI in production isn't a slogan, it's the job. Building systems that have to be reliable, auditable, and useful, even when the data is messy and the stakes are real. Today, we'll talk about what it really takes to operationalize data and machine learning, how you build teams at ship, how you move from proof of concept to production, how you maintain trust at scale. So there's a hell of a lot to talk about. Deepak, let's dive in, shall we? A warm welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
Good. How are you? I think it's a great sort of an opportunity to kind of get going. But yeah, I'm excited to be here. Let's see how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic to have you with us. Let's start, with the foundations and your background. Can you tell us a bit about your journey into tech? What first drew you to data and to engineering? Was there a moment where you thought maybe, data it's not just reporting. It's it's the engine.
Yeah. Sure. So I think I got into this data world back in 2006. And I got into tech of this industry, and because I was very fascinated about the system, I know how these complex systems works together behind the scenes. I started in data engineering when it was mostly about reporting and pipelines, right? But over the time, I realized that data isn't really about dashboards, right? It's about decisions, right? How do you influence those decisions by the data which is running behind those dashboards and those meetings, right? So currently, working in these large-scale financial system, I see how critical processes were, and they were still manual, right, and fragile, and that pushed me to focus on building intelligent data platforms, right, systems that don't just move data but understand it and help prevent problems before they happen. And that's where I think my whole journey into tech started. So yeah, over the period of time, I learned a lot. I analyzed where I started and where I am right now, and that triggers me in terms of always be in that learning mode and try to improvise my skills towards wherever I go and whatever I do, and make those teams and organizations up level. So this is where I think things get more into my skill set level and journey level. Yeah.
And I'm interested to hear, over this, close to 20-year period, right? You said you got into it in 2006. As so much has happened since then, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years as well. I'm just interested to hear, is there anything that's surprisingly, very, very similar or the same as when you kind of entered the field?
Yeah, I think you said surprising slow, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one other thing I feel over the past, let's say I've been into this data for past 20 plus years, right? And then, what surprised me over these past 10 plus years, I think, there are different skill set of mindset, right? I think that's where I think we also, if you think of in all four big techs, right? I think they are very fast in evolving towards this new technology, right? You talk about Amazon, Microsoft, or Apple and all, right? But what I've kind of foresee or kind of observed is some of the companies which are not into these four techs, I think they are pretty much working in that legacy mode. Take an example of a telecom. So telecom is very telecom wanted to go into that AI plus of cloudscapes environment, but then the challenge comes out with the reliability of the data, right? Because that data which I'm talking about, the telecommunications and bankings, are very, very controlled mechanism, right? So they don't want to shift gears just like that, right? And because it's a very critical data, governance data, right? I think you don't want to get rid of it. So that is where I think these kind of tech mindsets or companies has to be kind of go into that zone where they adopt these AI world where they can get more out of it. But the problem I think with these companies are they wanted to make sure that they understand what they are chipping into, because they cannot just go and jump in, right? And it deals with very financial control mechanism data, and that's where I think this is one of my observation in past, but they are still improving. But that's where I think they have to adopt it and understand how things will help. Yeah.
And to talk a little bit more, about Amazon, the context there really, and how teams are operating, how your team is operating, because Amazon's known for its leadership principles, right, and this kind of customer obsession. But in your world, within the company, data and analytics, machine learning, as we've been talking about, what does customer obsession look like day to day for you? Like, who is your customer in practice?
Yeah, and I think I would kindly appreciate what I learned in Amazon. I think those key principles I always carry with me, and then try to improvise it wherever I go. Right. So for me, see, customer obsession for my data and AIML teams means that we don't only optimize for dashboard, right? We don't only go and just make sure that do the changes and move on, right? What we optimize for a decision impact. And when I say decision impact, like our customers, our finance teams closing the books every month end, right? And so what we do is we design systems that reduce stress, reduce risk, and reduce manual work for them. And that's where I think my mindset, as well as my team mindset, goes with how do I improve their day-to-day activities, how do I improve their close cycles, right? What the minimum pain points they have during month end close is what we try to move forward with and try to improvise it. Yeah, so I think this is where it goes. Yeah.
And what does success look like in your team, in your organization, when it comes to like delivering these data products or capabilities? Is it adoption of the products or services that you're kind of delivering? Is it the time saved, fewer escalations? What is it, if you would say one thing?
Yeah. So in our organization, I think so. This is what my theme also goes with, right. So in my organization, I don't define success is just only by delivering to customers, and or take an example of an AI model, like the model accuracy, right. What we do is, like, successful model looks like when it reduce friction, right, in a very critical workflow, right, improve confidence and decision making, or materially low risk, right. I think these are some of the things which I always follow. And right now it's all AI, and AI, it's kind of booming up, right. And what we do from an AI aspect is, like, we look for majority three things there: adoption, trust, and impact, right. How do you take these things into picture and put together in front of a product or a customer, whatever he's trying to use, and then we see how things would work. And that is where I think you add a lot of value towards your customer, where if you see an adoption being happening, you means there is a good sense of whatever you're building is helping customers. And that is where I think we try to improvise what we do and then take it forward from there. So this is what we do. Yeah.
And from getting these products or services, models, whatever it might be that you're building, from POC to production, like a lot of companies can get whatever product or a machine learning model proof of concept working, right? But the hard part is really getting it into production, or getting it production ready. So what would you say have been the biggest challenges that you've witnessed, like moving machine learning from, say, a notebook to a production service?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I think up until last year, most of these models are gone into notebooks, right? Not into the production-wise version. And then the ML ops is a pretty important aspect of this whole platform. So the biggest challenge I feel in moving ML from proof of concept to production, it's in the model, right? It's everything around the model. Like, how do you surface data drift, right? How do you surface monitoring, observability, explainability? How do you control the versions, right? And integration to the real workflows, right? So all of these things came together and make sure that things are happening. And while we do that, there's another big challenge, is a change management, right? How do you handle the change management aspect of it? Because when the model is in lower environment, you need to have all sort of environment ready to make the model test it out working fine, right? So that's where I think the biggest problem comes in. Model might be 90% accurate, but like, what if stakeholders don't trust your model? Like, what will you do? Right? That won't help you in longer run. So the shift from POC to production isn't really a shift from experimentation. I think it's where the strong data engineering foundation comes into picture, where ownership becomes critical, and that's where I think it will help in terms of how things will go. Yeah.
No, well put. Is there Is it an area that you would say a lot of teams, a lot of people kind of underestimate the work involved, whether that be kind of data readiness or monitoring, whatever it is? Is there a specific area?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think at this point of time, like in 2026, starting right. I think most of the teams and orgs, I think they are moving their focus towards all these aspects of productionized version, and now I think they are well prepared in terms of what needs to be done. But prior to 2026, I think it's all about notebooks. It's not operationalized, right? I think that's where the bigger challenge was. But I think teams are kind of moving forward to the mindset has been changing. How they're putting more focus on not improving the model, but also how do we make the model sustain over the period of time. I think that is where I think things will getting improved now. Yeah.
Yeah. You've mentioned the word trust a couple of times already. So, talking a little bit about quality and trust and governance as well. AI transformation as a phrase I think gets thrown around quite a lot for good reason as well. But like the reality is like really complex when it comes to transformations, right? So how does Amazon and how do you guys ensure quality, trust, and compliance when you're kind of deploying AI and machine learning at the scale that you are at Amazon?
Yeah, sure. So I think you're absolutely right, right? So AI transformation sounds exciting, right? But at the scale, it's fundamentally a governance challenge, is what I feel, right? Because what happens is like when you think of a situation where even though I believe, right, if my belief is that a quality and trust start with strong data foundations, right? Like how you make sure that whatever you use behind the scenes of AI model is what do you say, controlled, well DQ checked, right, and then put it into a model. So before a model ever goes live, this is what I take, right? I ensure that there should be a proper data lineage, right? Well defined ownership, and it should be auditable approach, right? This is where I think. And we also treat AI systems as a long-term services. We don't treat as a short-term services, right? Not experiments, because now that era is gone, right? We are done with that experimenting era. So what we do is that means like, we have to continuously monitoring the drift if the model is not behaving as per expectation, right? If there is a performance degradation, right, or there is an unintended bias. I think these are some of the things. And apart from that, I think if I think of another aspect is which is compliance, right? Compliance is built into this architecture so that the access control has to be there, explainability has to be there. There should be a proper review mechanism, because if human in the loop aspect, right, where it has to be very, very much human reviewed, even the model is giving some results, right? So these are some of the things, and ultimately at scale, trust is earned through operational rigor. You cannot just build that model and just launch it, right? And AI has to be measurable, experimentable, and accountable. I think that's where I feel all of these factors comes into picture and help build that trust with not within your kind of model, whoever is generating, but also with the customers, whoever is using it. So this is what I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And you've also you've also written and spoken a lot about governance and automation, right? I think you write quite a lot on this topic. Can you share an example where strong governance made a real difference in your work, and kind of how you balance automation with this kind of rigorous governance in large real time environments like at Amazon?
Sure. So I think for me, the governance comes down to three things, right? So lineage, guardrails, and I feel like the accountability aspect, right? So in all of these large financial big firms, right? I think this is where I have observed, not even Amazon, but even with AT&T when I was with AT&T, even a small logic change could materially impact downstream with a huge impact, right? And that's where my gut feeling or my mental model of handling this, like you should have a very strong data lineage, automated validation, checks, and clear ownership before deployment, right? I think that is where when you have these things, right, what you do is you prevent the cascading errors, right? You have an affected executive decisions, right? That is what I think. And out of all of this, the key lesson was this is the scales impact, right? But governance protects it, even though you can scale exponentially, but like if you don't have a governance in place, like you will fail fast. And that's where I think you wanted to make sure that you have all these considerations being there into your any whatever you do and whatever you implement, and all of these real-time environments. Yeah, so this is where I feel like it should go. Yeah.
What because this matter of governance is one thing in a company, a colossal, a giant like Amazon, right? But what does like this, let's call it minimum viable governance look like for a company that's, much smaller or much earlier in the journey? What does that look like?
Yeah, and I feel so. I think from that aspect of any other company, if they want to be go with the very minimum viable, right? I think they need to focus on three things, right? Observability, and make sure that they are observing what they are launching, right? Number one, and the second is like maintainability, right? How do you maintain what you are going to launch? I think these are some of the things. If any of these smaller firms or anyone who wants to adopt these kind of methodology, they can go with that aspect, right? Because I feel you don't want to be a kind of a foolproof approach to go forward with it. At least if you have these two minimum things in your deployment or in your product, then I think it should be okay to move forward with. Yeah.
And let's talk briefly about AI and how it's reshaping data engineering, because you've talked quite a bit about this as well and how it's reshaping the data engineering landscape, particularly areas that you've been mentioning just before, observability and automation, of course, but also in areas such as synthetic data and just wider, better access as well. Where do you think AI is really impacting or changing the day-to-day work in your profession at the moment, and where do you think it's headed over the next, say, 12 months?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, right? So I think at this point of time, I think most of the mindset has been changing now, right? I think there was an era or time when the adoption or the mindset with respect to AI is not as welcoming, right? I think people are trying to underutilize that aspect of what AI can provide. Over the period of 1.5 year, I think this mindset has been changed drastically. Where take an example of a day-to-day activities, right? Like if you're not even from the level where I am right now, where the level where actually you're entering into the coding and all, right? So people are actually started adopting at the very minimal scale to the maximum scale, right? Where utilizing at the level of coding, trying to get their productivity up. Number one. The second is helping using AI. You are helping not only you but also your customers to make sure that customer doesn't have to wait for X weeks or so to get things done, right? Because now the productivity is up. You are being faster. You are using AI in your day-to-day activities, and you're delivering your customers faster. So I think it is something which is kind of in a way where people are trying to foresee what they can get it, and they're also trying to make sure that they are helping customers around using AI in terms of getting things work done faster. So yeah, I think things are changing. I think it will change as when we move forward too. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's there's a lot more, there's a lot of kind of real signal out there now, right? As opposed to the hype of, say, a couple of years
Yeah.
ago or
Yeah.
whatever it was. But if you look at, say, modern data platforms, right? What would you say makes a platform truly AI ready? Is it kind of architecture, tooling, the operating model, or is it even the culture within the company? What would you say really makes it kind of AI ready?
Yeah. From any data platform, I feel the way you can, or anyone wanted to say like, hey, you know what, they are AI ready, right? When they start utilizing the niche skills of AI into the day-to-day activities. Number one. The second is um, you know from a standpoint of like adoption, right? Like how do they adopt with the proper governed and maintainable approaches, right? I think that is where I feel like these companies who are actually going into that zone of delivering to their customers, utilizing their activities towards how they will help in terms of improving the customer day-to-day activities, right? That's number one. That's one of the things I can think of. They can start giving into that AI adoption aspect. And number two is while they are doing it, they are also expanding towards whatever they build in terms of model, thinking in terms of how do they want to sustain that model instead of just building it and launching it. I think those are some of the things. If they start adopting, I feel they are getting into the right direction and take it forward towards the next role. Yeah.
And as teams grow, presumably we know the bottlenecks kind of change, right, within those teams. What are the most common bottlenecks in your experience, or even misconceptions that you encounter when data and machine learning teams try to scale?
Yeah. I feel I think there are like this is my perspective, right? I feel there are like three bottlenecks, important bottlenecks, right? I think one of the bottlenecks I can think of is a clarity. Second is ownership and over optimization, right? I think all these three, bottlenecks will kind of play an important role, right? So first take an example of a clarity. If there is a lack of clarity, right, what happens is all these teams jump into this building without aligning with their customers, right? And what that alignment comes out from a decision standpoint. So they are trying to improve, but they don't know what they're improving. I think that's one of the aspects where clarity has to be there, what you are doing, right? Unclear ownership, right? Because what happens is whatever you're building sometimes overlap with your some partner teams, right? I think you need to be sure that whatever you are building is being proper discussed, aligned, and make sure that you are moving forward in the right direction, so that you're not reinventing the wheel and take it forward, right? I think that's second. And the third one is over optimizing. So what happens is sometimes whatever you're doing, right, in terms of model creation and all, you're over optimizing and over stressing on improving the model. I feel like team focus on accuracy improvements while ignoring adoption, right? Adoption and integration. I think those are some of the things I feel becomes bottlenecks in case if you don't consider these at the very early stages, right? And probably cause of failure in the future, right? So they have to be very sure of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And on the topic of teams and and also kind of hiring, one thing I think we hear a lot of is this kind of skills gap, and I think this is changing obviously now, particularly with kind of agentic coding in other areas of tech, right? I'm just interested to hear kind of how you assess technical ability today versus potential when you're hiring for these kind of data and machine learning roles.
Yeah. Sure. And I think my mental model goes with accessing skills based on three dimensions, right? So I take consider foundations, problem solving, and learning velocity as the three key pillars. Or I see these three pillars in anyone whosoever I'm going with, right? The reason I see this, because if you talk about foundations, right? So foundations tell me whether they understand the code concept, like whether they know what they are dealing with. Are they understanding? Do they understand how things will go, right? In terms of the skill, so like data modeling, design, system design, right? I think these are some of the things which I look for. Problem framing is another one, right? Like can they translate the ambiguity into a structured thought process, right? That's another one. Learning velocity is an important aspect because while they are very good in writing code, they are very good in solving ambiguous problems, but are they fast movers? Are they fast movers in terms of learning, right? This AI is going on fast, right? Will they be able to kind of cope up with this? Yeah.
Exactly. And how do you, because it's a really, really interesting point. I think those three kind of pillars, as you say, are really, really interesting and they make a lot of sense. You have that kind of fundamental knowledge as like that guardrail right at the start. But the other two, particularly that learning velocity, how do you assess for that? That's
Yeah.
far harder to assess for than say these kind of the foundational skills or knowledge required of say a data engineer, right? So I'm just interested to hear how you go about assessing that pillar.
Yeah, no, I think so. There are multiple ways, Lee, right? So I think from within an org and outside an org, like if I'm within my team aspect standpoint, like I always influence them to kind of go all those internal trainings, right? Trainings plus of sessions plus of brainstorming sessions, peer reviews, and all of these contributes to the kind of aptitude to kind of learn and move fast. And when you do that, I think those are some of the opportunities as a leader you have to provide to your to your team, right? So that they can kind of spend time, understand how things are happening, how market is moving fast, and that. So those are some of the things I always do. Made it a practice in my team and take it forward from there to wherever it goes. Yeah.
Mm. And would you say, in addition to these, the fundamentals, right, those abilities, capabilities, would you say that this kind of potential or ability to learn fast is really what separates great candidates from good ones, or is there something else?
Exactly right, and I think exactly because I think learn and be curious is another principle of what Amazon has, right? So
Yeah.
you can easily observe, considering how that person is curious enough to learn what's going on, right? And I think that's where I think it separates out with a good versus best candidate, where best will try to improvise, learn, and get the solution out of it by himself. But good one, I think they take some time, right? And that's where I feel like this is where I think everyone has to be kind of adopt this principle and more make sure that they understand how things are moving.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, if you were just last one on this topic, if you were advising a hiring manager, for example, um, obviously there's a hell of a lot that happens on the job learning and whatnot. But is there one kind of interview exercise or question that you believe reveals whether someone can actually operate in real time in production environments?
Yeah, I feel so. Yeah, that's a good question though. But um, yeah, I think what probably as a evaluation aspect, right? What you can do is you can, whenever you're doing an evaluation from anyone, right? I think you easily can ask. There's no specific question though, but I think when you evaluate, you can easily go with an aspect of how how good is he in terms of improving his skills over the past 1 or 2 years, right? I think that is one of the thing which you can, even though whenever you look at his profile or his or her profile, you can easily kind of quantify the kind of risk taking activities. And that's where I think there are very specific question, how do you want to make sure that you understand the technological change and adopt the technological change as you move forward, right? I think those are some of the things you can easily observe. But yeah, there's no specific question, but those are some of the things I think you gain it as and when you move forward with. Yeah.
Mm. And to just go back briefly to particularly on like the enterprise versus kind of startups and how and how they're using AI differently, or what it means basically to be AI or to use AI rather efficiently. From your perspective, what does it mean for say a large enterprise like Amazon to use AI efficiently, and how is that different to how startups are leveraging it?
Yeah, I think it goes with the majority of the not majority, but I think it goes with any larger enterprise, right? I think from that aspect, it should be focused on responsible scale, right? Like you it's not just about building a great model, right? It's about integrating that AI into governed systems, right? Ensuring compliance and monitoring performance, right? All of these things came together and say like, hey, you know what, this is where I think whatever solution you build scale in near future, right? In startups, the AI is often about speed and differentiation, right? I think because startups run fast, right? You don't you have time to kind of improve it, but you have to show the results, right? So proving value quickly and experimenting fast is a very important aspect in startups, right? Like how do you want to make sure that you pivot quickly? You don't want to spend a lot of time in just experimenting. And that's where I think the difference is, right? Startup optimize for velocity, right? But
Yep.
all these big firms optimize for impact at scale, and that's where I think the difference comes out. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And it's, um, enterprises are often kind of weighed down, for want of better words here. They're weighed down by the processes and governance that are in place for good reasons as well. But
Yeah.
do you think there's anything that enterprises can kind of realistically steal from startups and their kind of ways of working?
Yeah, and I think I think it goes with that what do they the kind of a business model, right? Like how these enterprise companies works, right? And yeah, there's an opportunity. I think I'm not saying that all these big firms are always being in that same zone of sustainable impact at scale. I think what There are a bunch of other, multiple other, sub products or sub initiatives which actually goes in the startup mode. And that's where I think, what I can think of or maybe suggest is like, even though you have an aptitude to kind of, sustain this for a longer run, but if you fail fast and learn from that failure, will help in terms of these bigger funds to kind of, get going. Yeah. So that's what I can think of. Yeah.
And in addition, like, is there any advice that you would give to any data leaders that will be listening to this who are just starting to integrate AI into products and workflows, specifically machine learning products and workflows?
Yeah. I feel, yes, I mean, like, I can think of three things, right? One is, always, and this is what I also adopt. Maybe someone has a different mental model, right? But this is where I feel like, it's supposed to be, right? So I feel like three things. Start with a decision, right? I think that's one of the important aspect of what you want to be building. Then make sure that your data foundation there is, perfect, right? It's well controlled, right? And the last is whatever you're doing it designed for a trust, because those are the three things which will help in terms of getting a very solid product in terms of getting near future, right? I think because all of these things when you do it, like if you take an example of AI, so if you don't start with a model, start with a business decision. I think that's one of the important aspect, and this is where I think if you invest a lot in data foundation and build a trust from day one, I think that would help in terms of get going. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good kind of mental model as you put it. Do you have any kind of frameworks or best practices that you use internally that you think could kind of benefit other organizations when you're thinking in these ways?
Yeah, I mean, I don't kind of document this thing, but this is where I over the period of like 20 years I learned. I failed in the first attempt back in like 2013 or 14, where I wasn't kind of so sure of like how do I want to ship the product. But then over the period of like 6, 8, 9 years, I worked in a startup before Amazon. Then I came to Amazon, right? So I understand how these startups and Amazon mindset works, and that's where I learned about these mental models or mental themes, which I always follow wherever I go. So yeah, I mean that's how it goes. But again, it goes back to the point where what you learn over the period of time and take it forward. I think those are some of
Yeah.
the yeah.
Fantastic. And to move on and talk a little bit about trends in the next few years. Yeah, crazy to think about the next few years, really, with everything going on in the industry, in the field, in the world, of course. But what emerging trends in data are you most excited about right now, and why?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, it's changing drastically. That's one thing I can say, right? But I think, I'm excited about three things, right? One is how these systems are being building. They're called as a decision intelligence, right? The synthetic data and self-healing systems. I think these are the very, very, I mean, like these are some of the things which keep me, excited every day, right? How are we be able to utilize these important things into a day-to-day, like for an example, take a decision intelligence shift, right, from the focus from isolated models to AI that meaningfully improves workflows, right, and business outcomes. Now we have agents coming into picture, right? So earlier we just have models, everyone was focusing on models. Now we have agents are kind of helping, talking to each other and trying to automate the end-to-end workflow. I remember back in 2012 and all, right? So we used to create those workflows manually in some product. Now it's all agents, right? So that's one.
Yeah.
Synthetic data, right? You don't need to get the data. Synthetic data is always like unlocking new ways to test, validate. So you're not spending time in extracting something from somewhere and then putting it up. And self-healing systems, right? So your platforms are automatically detecting the drifts, right? Making sure that any anomalies coming into picture, it's being highlighted. So these trends aren't about cool tech for its own sake, right? I think they're about making AI reliable, trustworthy, and operational in the real world. I think those are some of the things I feel like good trends in near future, how it goes with. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's really well put, and these are kind of significant opportunities for innovation in data as
Exactly.
well, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in on the flip side, what are you maybe most skeptical about? Is there a trend that you're particularly skeptical about?
Yeah, I think I'm more skeptical about the movement of this happening so fast, right? I think even though there are like things which is currently you are okay to rely on, right? But I think one of the things which I'm more skeptical about is how do you how do you gain trust over the period of next 3 or 5 years, right? What do you want to do in terms of getting these, even though you're making sure that you have this reliable system in place, you have governed and everything, but you need to be very very cautious about not blindly just go and check it and then make it take it forward, right? I think that's one of the things where I'm too kind of not concerned, but again, I mean, you always have to be monitoring and things are there. I think those are some of the things I will always look for, move forward with. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's the same in software engineering at the moment, right? Where there's potentially even more happening in the agentic coding field, and I think it's the same in data, right? Where these agents are being used for similar workflows or
Yeah.
in similar ways, and I think it's a lot of people can agree where that. Of course, this kind of fundamental knowledge of the individual, the human, is still very, very important right now in
Yeah.
terms of collaborating with the agents, checking on the work that's been done and everything. But where do you see it maybe, say, 1 to 2 years? It's hard to kind of put a time frame on it because a lot can happen just this year, of course. But let's say in 2 years, how do you think your role as a leader, but also on like a deeper level as a data engineer, will have changed, say, in 1 to 2 years?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So I remember like I started from a data warehousing leader, right? I think now it moves to big data and then goes to a data engineering, and now it's ML. So I think over the period of 3 to 5 years, I think opportunities. I think I start with opportunities. So opportunities are with an autonomous data platform, AI native workflows, and real time governance, right? So while these opportunities are coming over, I think from my perspective as a leader, it goes with the mindset of a mixed skill set, right? I think I don't want to be in a zone where I am only going towards thinking in terms of data, but also thinking of like how do I create autonomous data platforms, right? Back in 3 4 years back, it was all about hey, still human has to be involved, but now how do I make sure that I don't need to get involved my engineers into writing a code or writing a data pipeline? How do I auto generate these data pipelines by automating the requirements, right? Then putting that into any of the system like Claude 3.0 or Sonnet, right, to generate the ETL pipelines. And that is where I think from a productivity standpoint, it will improve, right? And when it improves, it will eventually reflects in customer adoption, right? I think that is where I feel like this role will improvise, because I want to make sure that whenever I talk to my engineers or motivate them, I have to change their mindset to not going with the traditional way of writing a code, but go with the automation data pipelines. And this is where I
Yep.
think I should focus on.
As I start to wrap up, then, is there like one piece of advice that you'd like to share with the next generation of builders, especially those aiming to work in data, in analytics, machine learning? Whether that's a piece of advice you wish you had at the start of your career, or any kind of habits that you've formed along the way.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I wish I would have got that advice though, right? Because I've been into multiple skills starting 2006, was a Java developer. Then I realized I am a data guy, right? But I wish someone told me earlier that always optimize for learning speed, not job titles, right? I think that's one of the key thing which I adopt as a principle in my career, and I would advise like the earlier in your career, it is easy to chase roles, right, or prestige, right, but what really compounds over the time is like the learning, right? I think if you learn and adopt as the technology change happens, I think it will not only it will not only give you titles, but it will also improve in terms of how things will go. So focus on understanding the fundamental is always to be stay curious, right? I think this is where I think the fundamental goes, and put yourself in an environment where you stretch yourself. Don't hesitate to kind of go above and beyond and try to stretch yourself and try to dive deep, right? I think that's one of the thing. So because skills will evolve, tools will change, but the ability to learn fast and think clearly, that's what build a long-term leverage, right? I think that's one of the principle I follow, and I always recommend to everyone to follow.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like it's more relevant now than ever. So yeah, really, really well put.
Exactly.
Anything to add, Deepak, before we wrap up here?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, and I think this is really helpful. And thank you for the questions, right? Because I think all of these questions are kind of aligned with the journey I probably put into. So appreciate that you put together, and thank you for this forum to comment it.
No worries at all. Thank you so much for joining us, Deepak. I think talking operationalizing machine learning to building trust in data at scale, right? I think there's a lot here that those listening, next generation of builders can take away and apply immediately. So thanks once again. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe and follow Builders wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for joining us, and until next time, keep building. We'll see you soon.